I shall see how you try to claim me when I am no longer within your reach. Lucienne believed freedom was just a window jump away. She was wrong. Betrayed by her own family and handed over to the highest bidder at a secret supernatural summit, she expected a life of servitude. Instead, she was claimed by Rohail al-Hassana, the most feared Mafia alpha in the underworld. In this dark werewolf romance, follow Lucienne as she navigates a world of betrayal, ancient bloodlines, and a possessive alpha who will burn the world down to protect her. From the gritty city streets to the ancestral ruins of the Silver Blood clan, this story is packed with fast-paced action, heartbreaking twists, and a romance that defies the laws of the pack. If you love stories about possessive alphas, secret identities, and mafia romance, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon. Now, let's dive in. I shall see how you try to claim me when I am no longer within your reach. Lucienne sat perched on the window ledge, her legs dangling 3 stories above the damp pavement. A smirk played on her lips, not of joy, but of cold, hard defiance. Behind her, the room was a cage she had inhabited for 19 years, a room that smelled of dust and the bitter scent of her uncle's neglect. She tightened the straps of her backpack, the nylon digging into her shoulders. With one last glance at the peeling wallpaper, she pushed off. The wind caught her hair for a fleeting second of freedom before her boots hit the dumpster below with a metallic clang. The landing jarred her teeth, but she didn't wince. Lucienne looked heavenwards, a proud, lethal expression hardening her delicate French-English features. "Have fun finding me," she spat toward the darkened window. She knew her uncle Baston, a man who gambled with lives as easily as cards would, and realize his bargaining chip was gone for at least an hour. By then, she'd be a ghost in the shadows of the city. She bolted. The cool night breeze brushed past her cheeks as she sprinted, clutching her backpack straps like a lifeline. Every step was a strike against the hellish life she'd endured since the accident that claimed her parents. Once, her life had been a rosebed of scent and safety. Her father had been a high-ranking enforcer, her mother a healer. But when the pack politics turned bloody, they were lost, leaving Lucienne to be protected by Baston. He hadn't seen a niece. He'd seen a political asset. To him, her rare silver wolf lineage was a prize to be traded to settle his many debts. The neon lights of the metro station blurred as she reached the platform. She panted, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The bullet train roared in the distance, a low hum vibrating through the soles of her shoes. Suddenly, the air changed. The scent of ozone and expensive tobacco filled her lungs. Before she could turn, 2 shadows detached themselves from the pillars. Men in obsidian black suits, their movements too fluid to be human, intercepted her. Lucienne thrashed, her elbow finding a rib, but they were like stone. "You cannot outrun your destiny, Lucienne dear." A cloud of thick, acrid smoke was blown toward her. Her uncle, Baston, stepped forward, his bulky frame straining against a silk waistcoat. He smiled, a cold, predatory grin. "No one can stop me from trading your lineage. You're the finest prize in the underground, and I have debts to settle." Lucienne glared at him, her hazel eyes glowing with a faint, suppressed amber light. Behind her, the bullet train she was meant to board shrieked past with a deafening roar, a blur of silver metal that mocked her failed escape. "You'll pay for this," she hissed. Baston laughed, a wet, guttural sound. He nodded to the guards. One of them pressed a cloth treated with a heavy sedative over her mouth. The world tilted. The screech of the train faded into a suffocating blackness. Lucienne woke to the sting of 1,000 suns. A sharp white spotlight burned into her retinas. She tried to move her hands, but they were bound behind her back with silver-threaded rope wolf nip, she realized with a surge of nausea. It dampened her strength, making her limbs feel like lead. She wasn't in the station. She was on a pedestal. She was draped in a shimmering, ethereal white gown that glowed under the stage lights, making her look like a captive celestial being. Lucienne scanned the front rows. Her panic spiked. She saw them, the power-hungry elite of the supernatural world. Cruel alphas with eyes that weighed her worth. She felt like a prize in a lion's den. However, she noticed something strange. While the men in the front leered, the men in the back, the ones with the most power, had their gazes lowered, their postures rigid with a terrifying sort of respect or fear. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the hall slammed open. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A man stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the stage. Every step he took echoed like a heartbeat. He didn't look at the auctioneer. He looked only at her. This was Rohail El-Hassana. His suit was charcoal. His aura was pure, unadulterated dominance. He reached the stage and stepped directly in front of Lucienne, his broad shoulders shielding her from the gaze of the crowd.
The room went silent. The air grew thick with the scent of sandalwood and ancient blood. 100 million. Rohail's voice was a low, velvet growl that vibrated in Lucienne's chest. The auctioneer stuttered. "S sold." Rohail didn't turn around. He leaned in close to Lucienne, his heat radiating through her thin gown, but he didn't touch her. Instead, he looked over his shoulder at the man standing behind him, his beta. "I want everyone blind," Rohail ordered, his eyes flashing a lethal, midnight blue. "Kill whoever dared to eye what belongs to Rohail Al-Hassana." As the first screams erupted in the back of the hall, Rohail finally looked Lucienne in the eye. "Don't look away, Petite Louve," he whispered. "The nightmare is over. The cage has just changed shapes." The auction hall had descended into a symphony of shattered glass and suppressed groans. Rohail Al-Hassana did not look back at the carnage he'd ordered. He reached out, his hand, massive and scarred across the knuckles, slicing through the silver-threaded ropes binding Lucienne's wrists as if they were wet paper. Lucienne stumbled, her circulation rushing back in a wave of fire. She didn't thank him. She swung. Her palm moved like lightning, aiming for his jaw, but Rohail caught her wrist midair. His grip wasn't crushing, but it was absolute. It was the grip of a man who had broken alphas for sport. "Vicious," Rohail murmured, his thumb brushing against her pulse point. He could feel her heart hammering, not just with fear, but with a wild, feral rage that matched his own. "I didn't buy a doll. I bought a storm." "I am not something to be bought," Lucienne hissed, her French English lilt sharpening with venom. "And yet here we are." Rohail stripped off his charcoal suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The heavy fabric, smelling of cedar and power, instantly masked her scent from the dying men in the room. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over her ear. "Run if you wish, Lucy. I enjoy the hunt. But every man in this room who saw your face is already a dead man walking. Outside those doors, you are prey. Inside my shadow, you're a queen." He didn't wait for her consent. He swept her into his arms, carrying her through the back exit as his enforcers, men with the cold eyes of the Al-Hassana syndicate, finished their grim work. They were thrown into the back of a black armored SUV. The engine roared to life, a beast waking up. As the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, Lucienne huddled into the oversized jacket, her mind racing. She was out of the frying pan and into a furnace. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, trying to find the door handle. "To the only place in this city where the council cannot touch you," Rohail replied, staring straight ahead. "My estate. The Lion's Denver." "I'm a wolf, not a lion," she snapped. Rohail finally turned to her, his eyes darkening to a shade of blue, so deep it was almost black. "You are a silverblood, Lucienne. The last of a lineage that was supposed to be extinct. Your uncle didn't just sell you for money. He sold you because the high alpha of the Northern Basin wants your head on a spike to solidify his claim." The SUV swerved suddenly, the tires screeching. A heavy black truck rammed their side, sending the vehicle skidding toward the edge of the bridge. "Brace," Rohail growled, lunging across the seat to shield her body with his own just as the glass shattered. The hunt hadn't just started. It had turned lethal. The world inverted. The SUV rolled twice, a violent cacophony of screeching metal and exploding glass. Lucienne's world narrowed to the scent of Rohail's skin, a mix of rain and old-world dominance, as he locked her against his chest, his massive frame acting as a human roll cage. When the vehicle finally slammed onto its roof at the edge of the bridge, the silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. Lucienne gasped for air, the copper tang of blood filling her mouth. Rohail was already moving. He kicked the distorted door off its hinges with a force that sent it flying into the river below. He dragged her out, his movements fluid despite the glass embedded in his shoulder. "They're coming," Lucienne whispered, pointing toward the three black SUVs screeching to a halt 50 yards away. Dozens of men emerged, not just Mafia soldiers, but shifters. The air thickened with the scent of wet fur and predatory musk. These were the High Alpha's elite hit squad, the Loups Noirs. "Stay behind me," Rohale commanded. His voice had dropped an octave, vibrating with a tectonic threat. He didn't pull a gun. He didn't need one. He began to unbutton his dress shirt, his muscles rippling and distorting beneath his skin. "There are too many of them, Rohale," Lucienne shouted, her own inner wolf clawing at her throat, begging to be let out. But she couldn't. Not here. If she shifted, the silver-white glow of her fur would be a flare in the dark, signaling her location to every enemy for miles. "Numbers mean nothing to a king," Rohale growled. The first shifter, a massive gray wolf, lunged. Rohale didn't even fully shift. He met the beast midair, his hands lengthening into claws, his eyes glowing a terrifying, radioactive blue. He caught the wolf by the throat and slammed it into the pavement with such force the concrete cracked. A sickening crunch echoed through the night. But more were coming. Lucienne saw a sniper on the bridge railing aiming for Rohale's head. "Rohale, look out." Without thinking, Lucienne dove. She didn't shift, but she tapped into the silver-blood speed. She was a blur of white silk and desperation. She tackled the sniper just as the silver bullet whistled past Rohale's ear. They tumbled over the railing. Lucienne, Rohale's roar was no longer human. It was a sound of pure, possessive agony. She plummeted toward the icy black water of the river, the wind whipping her hair into a frenzy. Just before she hit the surface, she saw it, the silhouette of a massive, midnight black wolf leaping from the bridge after her. The water hit like a brick wall. The cold was an instant, paralyzing shock, dragging Lucienne down into the dark. The silver-threaded rope marks on her wrists burned like acid in the salt water, the wolf-nip poison reacting to the cold. She was sinking. Her lungs screamed for air. "Shift," her inner voice pleaded. "Shift or die." But she couldn't. If she shifted, the Al-Hassana's secret, that she was the last Silverblood, would be out. Rohale had bought her to protect her, or so he said, but in this world, protection was just another word for possession. A shadow moved in the water. A massive shape, more powerful than any current, dove toward her. Rohale. He was in his wolf form, a beast of impossible proportions, his fur as black as the abyss, his blue eyes glowing like twin stars beneath the surface. He clamped his jaws gently onto the scruff of her gown and kicked toward the shore. They broke the surface downstream, miles away from the bridge. Rohale dragged her onto the muddy bank, shaking the water from his massive frame. He shifted back in a blur of heat and shadow, standing naked and unashamed in the moonlight. He looked like a god carved from obsidian. He knelt over her, his hands trembling, the first sign of weakness she had seen. "Breathe, damn you." Lucienne coughed up a lungful of river water, shivering violently. Rohale immediately pulled her into his lap, his body heat acting like a furnace against her frozen skin. "You jumped," he whispered, his voice raw. "You risked your life for mine." "I didn't want to be someone else's property," she wheezed, her hazel eyes defiant even in her weakness. Rohale's gaze darkened. He leaned down, his forehead pressing against hers. "You aren't property, Lucienne. You are the catalyst. My enemies think you are my weakness. They are wrong." He stood up, lifting her effortlessly. In the distance, the howling of the Loups Noirs grew closer. They were being hunted through the dense, neutral zone forest. "They're tracking us by your scent," Rohale said, his eyes scanning the treeline. "The Silverblood smells like lilies and lightning. We can't hide." "Then we fight," Lucienne said, her voice regaining its edge. She reached into her backpack, which miraculously stayed attached, and pulled out a jagged piece of silver glass she'd snatched from the SUV. Rohale smirked, a lethal, proud curve of his lips. "I like the way you think, Petite Louve. But to survive the night, you're going to have to do the one thing you fear most." "What's that?" "You're going to have to let the silver out." The hunting lodge was a rotting carcass of wood and rusted iron, hidden deep in the throat of the neutral zone forest. Rohale kicked the door open, the wood splintering under his heel. He didn't turn on the lights, he didn't need to. His blue eyes illuminated the shadows like twin searchlights. Inside. Now, he commanded. Lucienne stumbled in, her breath coming in ragged hitches. The silver thread poison from the earlier restraints was still circulating in her blood, making her transformation feel like swallowing needles. Outside, the howling was no longer distant. It was right at the perimeter. The loups noirs had found them. They won't stop, Lucienne whispered, clutching her chest. My uncle told them what I am. They don't want to capture me anymore, Rohale. They want to harvest me. Rohale turned, his bare chest glistening with rain and blood. He walked toward her, his presence filling the cramped room until the walls felt like they were closing in. He grabbed her shoulders, his touch searing. Then give them nothing but teeth and claws. The silver blood isn't a prize, Lucienne. It's a weapon. But you've spent years suppressing it, choking it. You're killing yourself from the inside out. If I let it out, I lose myself, she screamed back. I saw what happened to my father. The bloodlust took him before the hunters did. I won't let you lose yourself, Rohale growled. He pulled her flesh against him, his heartbeat a heavy, rhythmic war drum against her ear. Use my strength as an anchor. Shift, Lucienne. Shift, or we both die on this floor. The windows shattered. 3 massive wolves burst through the glass, their fur matted with forest debris. They didn't pause. They lunged. Rohale spun, his arm shifting into a clawed limb in midair, backhanding the first wolf into the stone fireplace. But the other 2 pinned him, their jaws snapping inches from his throat. Lucienne felt a white-hot snap at her spine. The core struggle she had suppressed for a decade exploded. It wasn't a gradual shift, it was a detonation. Her skin didn't just ripple, it glowed. A blinding, ethereal silver light erupted from her pores, smelling of ozone and ancient forests. A scream tore from her throat, transitioning into a haunting, high-pitched howl that froze the attackers in their tracks. Her fingernails lengthened into shimmering, translucent talons. Her hazel eyes vanished, replaced by molten silver. She didn't fully transform into a wolf. She became something midway, a predatory goddess of moonfire. With a burst of speed that defied physics, she moved. She was a blur of silver light. She didn't just fight the wolves, she dismantled them. Her claws sliced through their supernatural hides like they were silk. In seconds, the 2 wolves pinning Rohale were heaps of fur and cooling blood on the floorboards. Lucienne stood in the center of the room, her chest heaving, the silver glow radiating off her skin and illuminating the gore on her hands. She turned to Rohale, her silver eyes wild, unrecognized, and starving. Rohale stood up slowly, ignoring his wounds. He didn't look afraid. He looked obsessed. There she is, he breathed, stepping toward the shimmering monster she had become. The Queen of the North. Lucienne lunged at his throat. Her instinct screamed for blood. Even his. Rohale didn't flinch as Lucienne's silver claws grazed his jugular. He caught her by the waist, slamming her back against the sturdy oak table. He pinned her hands above her head, his body weight crushing the wildness out of her. Look at me, Lucienne, he roared, his alpha command vibrating through the very foundation of the lodge. Control it. Don't let the blood speak for you. Lucienne snarled, her teeth elongated and razor-sharp. But as she looked into Rohale's deep blue eyes, she saw something other than dominance. She saw a reflection of her own loneliness. A man who had been a king of shadows, waiting for a light bright enough to survive him. The silver glow began to recede, pulling back into her skin like a tide, leaving her shivering and gasping. Her claws retracted, leaving red marks on Rohale's wrists. I almost killed you, she whispered, her voice cracking. You almost saved us, Rohale corrected. He let go of her hands and cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away a smear of blood on her cheek. But the signal you just sent out, every alpha within 100 miles felt that surge. They know the silver is awake. Then we keep running, she said, her French English accent thick with exhaustion. No, Rohale said, his expression hardening into a mask of Mafia brutality. We stop running. My estate is a fortress, but it's also a cage if we stay there. We need an army. And there's only one person who can give us that. Who? Your uncle's rival.
Julian de Monte.
He runs the Southern Docks, and he hates the High Alpha more than he loves money. But he'll want a price for his loyalty. What price? Lucienne asked, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. Rohale looked at her, his gaze lingering on the see-through gown that was now torn and stained. A blood covenant. He wants to merge the Al-Hassana Empire with the Silver lineage. He'll want a wedding, Lucienne. A public display of power to challenge the council. Lucienne recoiled. You bought me to save me, and now you're selling me to a warlord? Rohale's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, his breath hot against her skin. I'm not selling you. I'm claiming you. The wedding will be to me. Julian just needs to witness the contract. You'll be my wife in the eyes of the underworld. Untouchable.
Mine.
Before she could protest, the sound of heavy engines approached. Not the hit squad. These were armored transporters. Rohale's reinforcements had arrived. We leave for the docks tonight, Rohale said, turning toward the door. Dress quickly. The next time you see the sun, you'll be the most powerful woman in the Mafia, or the most hunted. The Southern Docks smelled of salt, rust, and the metallic tang of hidden weapons. They arrived at the de Monte warehouse, a cathedral of corrugated steel and black market luxury. Rohale stepped out of the armored car first, his presence a silent declaration of war. He reached back and pulled Lucienne out, his hand sliding firmly around her waist. She was now dressed in a sleek, obsidian silk dress provided by his men, a garment that clung to her curves like a second skin, with a slit up the thigh that hid a silver-grade stiletto. Remember, Rohale leaned down, his voice a low vibration against her temple. Julian de Monte breathes on lies. Do not show him your fear, or he will use it as a map to destroy you. They were led into a glass-walled office overlooking the shipping containers. Julian de Monte sat behind a desk made of driftwood and bone. He was lean, elegant, and had the eyes of a serpent. Beside him stood his head of security, a man whose face was obscured by the shadows of a hood. Rohale al-Hassana, Julian drawled, his French accent thick and oily. The man who bought a myth.
And here she is.
The Silverblood. She has a name, Rohale growled, his grip on Lucienne tightening. I'm sure she does. But names are for friends. In business, we use titles. Julian leaned forward, his eyes scanning Lucienne with a clinical, chilling hunger. To back your play against a high alpha, I need more than a blood covenant. I need proof that the silver can be controlled. She is not a pet to be demonstrated, Rohale spat. Lucienne's gaze drifted to the hooded guard. Her heart stopped. A scent hit her, faint, beneath the smell of gunpowder and salt. It was the scent of home, of cedarwood, and the specific, herbal soap her mother used to make. The guard moved slightly into the light. Through the gap in the hood, she saw a scar, a jagged lightning bolt running from the temple to the jaw. Marcel. Her brother. The brother she had watched fall into the burning wreckage of their home 10 years ago. He shouldn't be alive. He should be ashes. Lucienne? Rohale's voice broke through her shock. He felt her go rigid in his arms. She didn't answer. Her silver eyes began to flicker, the coarse struggle of her emotions threatening to trigger a shift right in front of their greatest rival. Is she malfunctioning? Julian laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Perhaps the silver blood is as unstable as the legends say. Keep your tongue, Julian, Rohale warned, his blue eyes flashing dangerously. He turned Lucienne to face him, his hands cupping her face. Lucienne, look at me. What is it? She couldn't speak. She looked back at the guard, but Marcel, if it was him, remained a statue of cold stone. There was no recognition in his eyes, only a hollow, vacant stare. He had been turned into a guerrier de l'ombre, a shadow warrior, a mindless enforcer stripped of his soul through dark magic conditioning. "I'm fine," Lucienne lied, her voice trembling. She forced her gaze back to Julian. "You want proof of control? How about proof of survival? The High Alpha's men are dead on the bridge. Rohale and I are standing here. That is all the proof you need." Julian raised an eyebrow, impressed by her fire. A sharp tongue. "Very well. The covenant stands. We sign the papers tonight at the masquerade gala. But there is a condition." "I'm tired of your conditions, Julian," Rohale said. "This one is non-negotiable. To ensure the Al-Hassana and Imani alliance is unbreakable, I want your head of security to marry my sister. And I want the Silverblood to be the one to hand over the dowry, the ancestral crest of her family, which I know your Uncle Bastian still possesses." The room went cold. The crest wasn't just jewelry, it was a map to the Silverblood's ancestral moonwell, the source of their power. "Bastian is under my watch," Rohale said. "The crest will be delivered." As they turned to leave, Lucienne intentionally brushed past the hooded guard. For a split second, her hand touched his. A spark of silver light jumped between them, a soul bond connection. Marcel's hand twitched. A single word escaped his lips, so low only a wolf could hear it. "Run." The Damani estate was a fortress of marble and masks. The gala was in full swing, a sea of silk, velvet, and hidden identities. Every powerful shifter and Mafia don in the country was there, waiting to see the union that would shift the balance of power forever. Lucienne stood in the dressing room, staring at her reflection. She wore a silver filigree mask that mimicked the markings of a wolf. Rohale entered, looking lethal in a black tuxedo. He held a small velvet box. "The crest," he said, opening it to reveal a sapphire and silver pendant that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light. "I took it from your uncle's cold, dead fingers an hour ago." Lucienne's eyes widened. "He's dead. He outlived his usefulness the moment he touched you," Rohale said simply. He stepped behind her, fastening the pendant around her neck. His fingers were cold, but his breath was hot against her nape. "Once the ceremony starts, there is no going back. You will be my wife, my pack, my life." "And what of my brother?" she whispered. Rohale paused, his hands lingering on her shoulders. "I saw your reaction in the office. If that is Marcel, he is no longer the boy you knew. Julian has broken him. Trying to save him tonight will get us both killed." "I am not leaving him behind again," Lucienne said, her voice hardening. "Then we use the chaos," Rohale said, turning her around. "The High Alpha is here, Lucy. I can smell his rod in the ballroom. He won't let this covenant happen. He's going to strike tonight." "Good," Lucienne said, her silver eyes glowing behind the mask. "I want him to see me when I take his head." The doors to the ballroom swung open. The orchestra began a dark, haunting waltz. Rohale offered his arm. "Shall we dance with the devil, Mrs. Al-Hassana?" "Only if I get to lead," she replied. As they stepped onto the floor, the heavy scent of wolf nip incense filled the air, a trap. The High Alpha wasn't just going to strike, he was going to neutralize every shifter in the room. The ballroom was a swirl of gold leaf and predatory grace, but as the music reached a crescendo, the air turned sickly sweet. Beneath the scent of expensive champagne, a green-tinted haze began to seep from the floor vents. Wolf nip. Concentrated. A collective groan rippled through the elite crowd. Powerhouses of the underworld, men who could flip cars and tear throats, collapsed to their knees, clutching their chests as their inner wolves were forcibly suppressed. Rohale's grip on Lucienne's hand tightened, his knuckles turning white. His eyes, usually glowing with blue fire, flickered and dimmed. He stumbled, his massive frame suddenly heavy and mortal. "Rohale." Lucienne caught him, her own lungs burning. The silver blood in her veins screamed, but unlike the others, it didn't just shut down. It fought. The core struggle became a physical agony, a battle between the poison and her ancient lineage. She felt weak, but she remained standing while the alphas around her fell like harvested wheat. The double doors at the head of the stairs crashed open. The High Alpha, a man known only as Vane, stepped out.
He didn't wear a mask.
His face was a map of scars and arrogance. Behind him stood a line of men in gas masks, armed with silver-tipped crossbows. The age of the Al-Hassana ends tonight. Vane's voice boomed over the coughing crowd. And the silver blood comes home to her rightful master. Over my dead body, Rohale wheezed, trying to stand, but his muscles refused to obey. That can be arranged, Vane sneered. He signaled to his lead guard, the hooded figure of Marcel. Bring her to me. Kill the rest. Marcel stepped forward, his movements mechanical. He drew a serrated blade, the silver edge glinting in the candlelight. He approached Lucienne, his eyes vacant, looking straight through her. Marcel, stop. Lucienne cried out, reaching for the family crest at her throat. It's me. It's Lucienne. He didn't pause. He raised the blade. Lucienne didn't shift, she couldn't. Instead, she reached into the slit of her dress and pulled the silver stiletto Rohale had given her. As Marcel lunged, she didn't retreat. She stepped into his guard, parrying the heavy blade with a spark of steel. She used her Mafia training, the brutal, efficient close-quarters combat her father had taught her before the world burned. She danced around his heavy strikes, her heart breaking with every blow she deflected. I know you're in there, she hissed, slamming her palm into his chest to create distance. She saw it then, a flicker, not in his eyes, but in the way his hand trembled when her silver blood, dripping from a small cut on her finger, touched his skin. The soul bond flared. The crest. Rohale managed to growl from the floor. The blue stone. Break it. Lucienne realized then, the sapphire wasn't just a jewel. It was a stabilizer. If she broke it, the pure, unfiltered silver energy would explode, neutralizing the wolf-nip gas in a localized burst. Vane saw her intent. Stop her. As the guards raised their crossbows, Lucienne ripped the pendant from her neck and slammed it onto the marble floor with everything she had. The world turned white. A shockwave of pure lunar energy erupted from the shattered sapphire. It wasn't fire, but a cold, screaming wind of power that bleached the color from the room. The green gas was incinerated instantly. For the shifters, it was like a shot of adrenaline to the heart. Rohale let out a primal roar as his strength returned fourfold. He shifted mid-leap, a massive black blur that tore through Vane's front line before they could even pull their triggers. The ballroom became a slaughterhouse. But for Lucienne, the explosion did something more. The silver light flooded into Marcel. The vacancy in his eyes shattered. He gasped, dropping his blade as the dark magic conditioning was burned out of his nervous system by his sister's light. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. Lucienne, he choked out. I've got you, she whispered, grabbing his arm. But the victory was short-lived. Vane, realizing he was losing control, didn't flee. He pulled a remote detonator from his pocket. If I can't have the silver, no one will, he screamed. Lucienne, get down. Rohale shouted, throwing himself toward her. The explosion didn't come from the room. It came from the foundations. The floor beneath Lucienne and Marcel gave way as the structural supports of the Damani estate were blown. They fell into the darkness of the sublevels, the sound of Rohale's desperate roar the last thing she heard before the rubble silenced everything. Lucienne woke up in a tomb of dust and twisted rebar. Her legs were pinned, and her head was throbbing with a rhythmic, wet heat. Marcel, she called out, her voice a raspy ghost of itself. Here. A voice replied from the shadows. A hand reached out, pushing aside a heavy beam with effort. Marcel emerged, his face bloody, but his eyes finally, blessedly, clear. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in a decade. You grew up. I had to, she said, her eyes stinging. We have to get out of here. Rohale is still up there. The Al-Hassana Alpha? Marcel's voice turned hard. He's the one who bought you, Lucienne. He's no better than the others.
He saved me, Marcel.
He's the only reason I'm alive. He's the reason you're in this hole, Marcel countered, his protective brotherly instincts clashing with the reality of her new life. Before they could argue, The sound of heavy boots echoed through the tunnels. These weren't Rohale's men. They were the Loups Noirs, the survivors of Vane's hit squad, coming to finish the job in the dark. Lucienne looked at her pinned legs, then at the shadows moving toward them. "You have to go," she told Marcel. "You're the only one who can get to Rohale and tell him where I am." "I'm not leaving you again," Marcel snapped, drawing a hidden shiv. "We fight." Suddenly, the wall to their left exploded. Not from a bomb, but from a physical force so great it turned stone to powder. Rohale stepped through the dust. He was covered in blood, none of it his own. His tuxedo was in tatters, and his eyes were glowing with a blue light so intense it was blinding. He looked like the incarnation of death. He didn't look at Marcel. He didn't look at the approaching enemies.
He looked only at Lucienne.
"Did they touch you?" he asked, his voice a low, terrifying vibration. "No," she whispered. Rohale turned his head slightly toward the tunnel where the Loups Noirs were emerging. He didn't even shift. He simply let out a low, guttural growl that contained so much alpha authority it forced the approaching hunters to their knees in instinctive submission. "My wife is bleeding," Rohale said to the shadows. "And for every drop, I'm going to burn this city to the ground." He walked over and lifted the 300-pound beam off Lucienne's legs with one hand, as if it were a toothpick. He gathered her into his arms, his touch suddenly incredibly gentle. "Marcel," Lucienne said, reaching out a hand to her brother. Rohale looked at the brother he'd nearly killed. "If you want to live, boy, stay close. We're leaving. And the High Alpha is going to learn why my family's name is whispered in prayers for mercy." The Al-Hassana stronghold was a fortress of glass and steel perched on the edge of a jagged cliff. Inside, the air was filtered, silent, and heavy with the scent of old leather and power. Rohale had carried Lucienne straight to the infirmary, refusing to let anyone else touch her until her wounds were cleaned. Now, hours later, Lucienne walked through the silent halls, her legs wrapped in bandages, but her spirit restless. Marcel was being treated in a separate wing, under heavy guard. She wandered into Rohale's private study, a room filled with ancient maps and digital screens. On his desk lay a weather dossier, the seal of the Wolf Council cracked open. Driven by a sudden, cold intuition, she opened it. Her breath hitched. Inside were crime scene photos from 10 years ago, the night her parents died. She saw the familiar charred remains of her childhood home. But as she flipped the page, she saw a report she had never been allowed to see. The attackers weren't just random hunters or rival packs. They were a specialized liquidation squad sent by the Al-Hassana syndicate. The signature at the bottom of the order was bold and jagged. Malik Al-Hassana, Rohale's father. "You shouldn't be in here," a voice rasped from the doorway. Lucienne spun around, the dossier shaking in her hand. Rohale stood there, his chest bare, showing the fresh stitches from the gala. His eyes fell on the papers in her hand, and the blood drained from his face. "My father's men killed my parents," Lucienne whispered, her silver eyes flaring with a dangerous, unstable light. "You knew. You didn't buy me to save me, Rohale. You bought me because of the guilt. Or worse, to keep the last witness in a cage." "It's not what you think." Rohale stepped forward, his hands raised, but his alpha aura was flickering with uncharacteristic panic. "Did you know?" she screamed, the silver light beginning to ripple across her skin, cracking the glass coasters on the table. "Did you know your family's hands were soaked in my mother's blood?" Rohale's silence was his confession. "I found out the night of the auction. Why do you think I killed the auctioneer? Why do you think I'm burning the council down? I'm erasing the world my father built, Lucienne. By owning me," she spat. The door burst open. Marcel stood there, his eyes wild. He had heard everything. "I'll kill you," he roared, lunging for Rohale. The office exploded into chaos. Marcel, still weakened but driven by a decade of repressed trauma, slammed into Rohale. The two men crashed through a glass partition, tumbling into the hallway. "Stop it, both of you," Lucienne cried, but the core struggle was now a three-way war. Her loyalty to her brother, her growing, complicated love for her captor, and the crushing weight of the betrayal. Rohale didn't fight back with his full strength. He took Marcel's punches, his face a mask of stoic penance. "Hit me again," Rohale growled, spitting blood. "If it eases the debt my name owes you, hit me until your hands break." "I don't want your blood. I want your head," Marcel shouted, reaching for a decorative sword on the wall. Enough! The silver light didn't just flash, it solidified. Lucienne stood between them, a literal wall of shimmering energy separating the two men. Her voice was no longer human. It was the ancient, melodic chime of the silver blood. "We are being hunted by Vayne," she said, her eyes fixed on Rohale. "The High Alpha is moving his troops as we speak. If we tear ourselves apart now, my parents died for nothing. We will be the last of our lines, extinguished by our own rage." She looked at Rohale, her gaze cold enough to freeze bone. "You will give my brother a seat at your table. You will give him your armies. And when Vayne is dead, you and I will settle our blood debt. But until then, you are not my husband. You are my commander. Nothing more." Rohale stood up, wiping the blood from his lip. He looked at her, the woman who had truly become the queen he envisioned, and he bowed his head. It wasn't a bow of a husband, but of a soldier to a sovereign. "As you command, Lucy." The peace lasted exactly 20 minutes. The alarms of the stronghold wailed, a deep, bass thrum that shook the glass. On the monitors, dozens of heat signatures were appearing at the base of the cliffs. Not SUVs this time. Blackhawk helicopters and armored transport ships. Vayne had brought the entire northern basin pack. "They're bypassing the gates," Marcel said, checking the tactical feed. "They're scaling the cliffside. They're coming through the vents." "Let them come," Rohale said, his blue eyes turning lethal. He turned to Lucienne. "The vault in the basement. It's lead-lined. You and Marcel go there." "No," Lucienne said, her silver talons extending. "I am the one they want. If I hide, they'll kill every one of your men to find me. We meet them in the courtyard." "Lucienne, it's a suicide mission." Rohale grabbed her arm. She looked at him, a ghost of a smirk on her lips, the same smirk she had when she jumped out of her uncle's window. "I'm a silverblood, Rohale.
We don't die.
We just become legends." The roof of the study caved in. 4 loups noirs dropped from the ceiling, their jaws snapping. Marcel met the first with his stolen blade. Rohale shifted into the great black wolf, his fur bristling with murderous intent. Lucienne didn't wait. She ran toward the balcony, jumping into the night air. In midfall, the silver took her. She didn't become a wolf. She became a comet of white light, slamming into the advancing front line on the courtyard below. The shockwave sent shifters flying like autumn leaves. Standing in the center of the crater, Lucienne looked up. Vayne was descending on a private lift, his eyes fixed on her. "The hunt ends tonight, girl," Vayne yelled over the roar of the rotors. "I agree," Lucienne whispered. She turned to see Rohale, in his human form, standing on the balcony above, a sniper rifle in his hand. He wasn't aiming at Vayne. He was aiming at the fuel lines of the helicopters. "For the silver," Rohale roared. The world erupted in fire. The courtyard was a landscape of twisted metal and burning aviation fuel. The air was thick with the scent of scorched fur and ozone. Vayne stepped off his transport, his boots crunching on the glass-strewn pavement. He held a heavy, silver-weighted flail in one hand, a weapon designed specifically to shatter the bones of shifters. "You've caused quite a mess, little wolf," Vayne growled, his eyes tracking the silver light pulsating under Lucienne's skin. Lucienne didn't waste breath on words. She lunged. She was faster than any alpha he had ever faced. She moved like a flicker of moonlight, her talons aimed for his throat. But Vayne was a veteran of 1,000 blood wars. He swung the flail, the silver chain whistling through the air. It caught Lucienne in the ribs, the silver burning her skin and throwing her back into a burning pillar. "Lucienne," Rohale's voice echoed from the smoke. He emerged from the wreckage of the main hall, his skin covered in soot, his eyes glowing a lethal, radioactive blue. He wasn't alone. Marcel was at his flank, the two men moving in a synchronized dance of death. They were a wall of muscle and rage standing between the high alpha and the girl they both claimed. Two alphas protecting one piece of meat, Vane mocked. He whistled, and from the shadows, his remaining guerriers de l'ombre emerged, men like Marcel once was, hollowed out and lethal. Kill the brother. Bring me the Al-Hassana's head. The girl is mine. The collision was seismic. Rohale met Vane head-on, the impact of their bodies sounding like two freight trains colliding. Marcel took on the Shadow Warriors, his blade a blur as he fought the ghosts of his own past. Lucienne pushed herself up from the rubble, her ribs screaming in protest. She saw the core struggle playing out in real time. Rohale was losing. The silver-weighted flail was systematic. Every hit drained his ability to heal. She looked at the fuel tank of the downed Blackhawk nearby. It was leaking a river of high-octane fire toward the main gas lines of the estate. She didn't run to Rohale. She ran to the valves. "What are you doing?" Marcel shouted, parrying a strike from a shadow warrior. "Ending this," Lucienne yelled back. She gripped the rusted iron wheel of the main gas line. If she opened it, the entire courtyard would become a vacuum of fire. It would kill the army, but it would also level the only home Rohale had left. Vane saw her intent and kicked Rohale away, his face contorted in a mask of panic. "You'll kill us all, you mad bitch." "I've already been in hell, Vane." Lucienne's hazel eyes turned completely silver. "I'm just inviting you to join me." She wrenched the wheel open. The hiss of escaping gas was the only warning. Lucienne grabbed a flare from the ground and struck it. As the spark flew, Rohale realized her plan. He shifted back to human for a split second, his voice a raw command. "Marcel." Over the cliff. Rohale lunged for Lucienne. He didn't try to stop her. He wrapped his body around her as the world turned into an orange inferno. The explosion was a physical weight. It ripped the remaining loops noirs to shreds and sent Vane screaming into the darkness of the ravine. The shockwave tossed Rohale and Lucienne over the edge of the balcony, plummeting toward the crashing waves of the Atlantic hundreds of feet below. The ocean was a frozen, violent mercy. Lucienne surfaced first, her lungs burning, her silver glow extinguished by the sheer exhaustion of the blast. She looked around the dark, churning water, until she saw a dark shape bobbing near a cluster of jagged rocks. Rohale. She swam with her last remaining strength, dragging his unconscious body onto a narrow strip of black sand beneath the cliffs. He wasn't breathing. The explosion had taken the brunt of the impact through his back to protect her. "Don't you dare," she hissed, slamming her fists against his chest. "You don't get to die until I say the debt is paid. Breathe, damn you." She leaned down, pressing her lips to his, forcing the silver-charged air from her lungs into his. One breath.
Two.
Rohale coughed, a mixture of seawater and blood spraying onto the sand. His blue eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dim. You blew up my house," he wheezed, a ghost of a smile touching his bloodied lips. "You bought a storm, remember?" she whispered, her forehead resting against his. A shadow fell over them. Lucienne reached for her stiletto, but stopped. It was Marcel. He had survived the jump, his clothes torn to rags, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at the alpha on the ground, then at his sister. "The high alpha's body hasn't washed up," Marcel said, his voice grim. "And the council is already sending a cleanup crew to the top of the cliff. We have 10 minutes before this beach becomes a graveyard." "Where do we go?" Lucienne asked. "The only place they'll never look," Marcel said, looking toward the city skyline in the distance. "The slums. Your uncle's old territory. We're going to build a new pack from the gutter up." Rohale reached out, taking Lucienne's hand. His grip was weak, but his intent was iron. "Not a pack, Lucienne. An empire." The Alley of Thorns in the city's lower sector was a place where the sun never touched the pavement. Here, the air was thick with the smell of grease, damp concrete, and the bitter scent of omegas, shifters cast out by the high society packs for being too weak, too scarred, or too rebellious. Lucienne led the way, her silver eyes hidden behind a grime-streaked hood. Behind her, Marcel supported a limping Rohale. The fallen king of the Mafia was now a ghost in his own city, his presence masked by the stench of the slums. "This is where the council throws its trash," Lucienne whispered, stopping before a heavy iron door marked with a faded wolf's head. "My father used to come here. He said if you want to find the real heart of the wolf, you don't look in the palaces. You look in the gutters." She kicked the door. It didn't budge. She kicked it again, channeling a spark of silver into her heel. The iron shivered and groaned open. Inside was a subterranean boxing ring. Dozens of lean, hungry-looking shifters stood around a dirt pit. In the center, a massive, scarred female wolf was tearing into a side of raw beef. She looked up, her amber eyes locking onto Lucienne. "A silver blood in the rat holes?" The woman laughed, her voice like grinding gravel. "You're a long way from the auction block, princess." "I'm not here for a bid, Bibi," Lucienne said, stepping into the light of the flickering humming bulbs. "I'm here for an army. The High Alpha is weak. The Al Hassana fortress is ash. The world is up for grabs. And why should we follow a girl and a broken alpha?" Bibi spat, gesturing to Rohale. Rohale stepped forward, his blue eyes suddenly igniting. Even injured, his dominance was a physical weight that made the Omegas at the back of the room flinch. "Because," Rohale growled, "I'm no longer an alpha of a pack. I'm the alpha of the revolution. And she isn't just a girl. She's the one who's going to feed you the hearts of the men who threw you away." The recruitment wasn't free. Bibi, the leader of the city's outcasts, demanded a blood tithe to prove they weren't just bringing the High Alpha's wrath down on the slums for nothing. "There is a shipment of silver bullets arriving at the North Port tonight," Bibi said, leaning against the cage of the boxing ring. "The council is stockpiling them to wipe us out. You bring me the head of the transport captain and the crates of silver, and the Omegas are yours." "It's a suicide mission," Marcel hissed to Lucienne. "The North Port is a kill zone." "It's a test," Lucienne replied, her gaze moving from the hungry faces of the outcasts to Rohale. "And we're going to pass it." They struck at midnight. The port was a maze of shipping containers and searchlights. Lucienne moved through the rafters of the warehouse like a wraith, her silver blood humming in synchronization with the moon outside. Below, Rohale and Marcel took the flanks. The transport captain was a man named Giroux, a sadistic enforcer who had specialized in taming rebellious wolves. He stood by the crates, his silver-tipped whip crackling in the air. "I smell something expensive," Giroux mocked, looking up into the shadows. "Come down, little silver bitch. I have a leash with your name on it." Lucienne didn't drop down.
She vanished.
Using the core struggle of her power, the ability to move faster than the eye could track, she appeared behind Giroux. Her talons were already at his throat before he could swing the whip. "The only thing you're leashing tonight is your own blood," she whispered. With a single, fluid motion, she silenced him. The crates were secured, but as they began to move the hardware, a siren blared. The ground began to vibrate, not from trucks, but from something much larger. From the shadows emerged a juggernaut, a shifter injected with experimental berserker serum, 3 times the size of a normal alpha, its eyes glowing a sickly, chemical green. The juggernaut let out a roar that shattered the windows of the warehouse. It swung a massive, tree-trunk arm, sending Marcel flying into a stack of steel drums. Rohale shifted, his black wolf form looking small compared to the chemical monstrosity. He lunged, his jaws aiming for the beast's throat, but the juggernaut caught him midair and slammed him into the concrete floor.
Crunch.
Lucienne screamed as she saw Rohale's ribs cave in under the beast's foot. The silver light inside her turned from a glow to a blinding, jagged fire.
Get away
From him. She didn't just run. She ignited. The silver energy formed a blade-like aura around her arms. She dove at the juggernaut, her movements a blur of lunar fury.
She didn't bite, she carved.
The beast's serum-thickened hide was no match for the ancient purity of the silver blood. She sliced through its hamstrings, bringing the giant to its knees. Then, she leaped onto its back, her claws digging into its spine. "This is for the cages," she roared, driving her hand into the base of the beast's skull, severing the connection to its brain. The juggernaut collapsed with a thunderous thud. Lucienne stood over the body, her silver eyes pulsing, her chest heaving. She looked at Rohale, who was struggling to shift back, his body broken and bloody. She ran to him, cradling his head in her lap. "Stay with me. You hear me? We have an empire to build." Rohale looked up at her, his vision blurring. You're doing it, Lucienne. You're the alpha now." "We're both alphas," she whispered, a tear trailing through the blood on her cheek. Marcel limped over, clutching his shoulder. He looked at the crates of silver bullets, then at the dead beast. "Bibi will have her proof. But the council, they're going to send everything they have now. They know we aren't just hiding. We're hunting." "Let them come," Lucienne said, her voice turning cold and regal. "We have the silver now, and I'm tired of being the prey." The return to the Alley of Thorns was no longer a retreat, it was a parade of ghosts. When the heavy iron doors swung open and Marcel dragged in the severed head of Giroux alongside crates of silver munitions, the silence was absolute. Bibi stepped forward, her amber eyes reflecting the silver glow still humming off Lucienne's skin. Without a word, the massive woman knelt. Then one by one the Omegas followed. "The rat holes are yours," Bibi rasped. "Tell us who to bleed." Lucienne stood atop a rusted shipping container, Rohale leaning against it below her, his hand resting possessively on his holster. She looked at the sea of broken, hungry wolves. "The council controls us through fear and silence," Lucienne's voice carried through the cavernous room. "They own the airwaves. They tell the world we are monsters so they can keep us in cages. Tonight, we take their voice." She pointed to a map pinned to the wall. "The Black Spire. The city's central communication hub. If we take it, we broadcast the truth of the High Alpha's massacres. We wake up every pack in the country. We don't just fight a war, we start a revolution." The spire is guarded by automated silver turrets and a battalion of elite enforcers, Rohale warned, his voice a low vibration. "It's a fortress within a fortress." "Then it's a good thing," Lucienne said, looking down at him with a lethal spark in her eyes, "that I have the man who designed its security standing right here." The spire pierced the clouds like a jagged obsidian needle. The revolution didn't strike the front gates. While Marcel and Bibi led a loud, bloody diversion at the main entrance, Lucienne and Rohale moved through the sub-level cooling vents. The core struggle inside Lucienne was reaching a boiling point. The more she used the silver, the more it wanted to consume her. Her vision was beginning to tint white at the edges, the world slowing down until the spinning fan blades of the vents looked like stationary sculptures. "Lucienne, breathe," Rohale whispered, sensing her aura destabilizing. He pulled her into a small maintenance alcove. "The power is a tool, not a master. If you let it take over, you won't be able to come back." "I don't care about coming back," she hissed, her fingernails digging into the steel wall. "I want them to feel what I felt." Rohale grabbed her face, forcing her to look into his blue eyes. "I didn't buy you to watch you burn out. I need my queen, not a supernova. Anchor yourself to me." He kissed her, not the desperate kiss of the beach, but a hard, grounding claim. It acted like a lightning rod, drawing the excess energy out of her and into his own alpha frame. The alarm blared. They had been detected. The floor above them hissed open, and 4 sentinels, shifters encased in silver-plated power armor, dropped down. They didn't have souls. They were lobotomized soldiers programmed for one thing: termination. "Go to the transmitter," Rohale shouted, drawing a heavy-caliber handgun loaded with the stolen silver rounds. "I'll hold the hall." Lucienne sprinted up the spiral stairs, the sound of gunfire and metal-on-metal clanging echoing below. She burst into the server room, a cathedral of blinking lights and humming processors. At the center console sat the High Alpha's primary advisor, a thin, rat-like man named Vogel. He was frantically trying to delete files. "Get away from the console," Lucienne commanded, her silver light illuminating the room. Vogel sneered, his fingers flying across the keys. "You're too late, Silverblood. The cleansing protocol has been activated. In 5 minutes, every Omega sector in the city will be flooded with neurotoxin." Lucienne didn't hesitate. She didn't use her claws. She grabbed Vogel by the throat and slammed him into the screen. "Then you're going to show me how to stop it." "I'd rather die," Vogel wheezed. "That's the easiest part of the deal," Lucienne replied. She tapped into the Silverblood's ancestral memory, a trait she had only heard of in legends. She pressed her palm against the data drive, her energy surging into the machine. It was a digital core struggle. The machine resisted, its firewalls burning her skin, but she pushed harder. Images flashed through the monitors, her parents' execution orders, the auction logs, and the secret list of alphas who had been paying Vane for protection. "Broadcasting? Now," she whispered. Across the city, every television, every phone, and every jumbotron flickered to life. They didn't see a news anchor. They saw the blood-stained face of Lucienne, the Silverblood, standing over the ruins of the Council's secrets. "People of the Pax," her voice rang out across the skyline. "Look at your masters. Look at the blood they trade for your loyalty. The High Alpha is not a king. He is a butcher. And tonight the butchery ends." As the broadcast hit 100% completion, the doors behind her exploded. Vane walked in. He looked like a nightmare, half-burnt from the estate explosion, his left arm replaced by a crude, silver-clawed prosthetic. "You've had your fun, little girl," Vane growled. "Now, give me back my city." The rooftop of the Black Spire was a helipad of wind and thunder. Rain lashed down in icy sheets, turning the obsidian flooring into a slick, lethal mirror. Vane didn't wait for a dramatic standoff. He lunged, his silver prosthetic claw whistling through the air with the force of a falling guillotine. Lucienne dived, her body moving in a blur of silver light, the metal claw missing her throat by a fraction of an inch and sparking against the stone. "You think a broadcast changes the world?" Vane roared, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Wolves follow strength, and I am the strongest thing this city has ever birthed." He swung a heavy blow that caught Lucienne in the shoulder, sending her skidding toward the edge of the roof. Below her, the city was a grid of flickering lights, thousands of eyes watching their struggle on the jumbotrons. Lucienne coughed. The core struggle inside her reached its zenith. Her silver aura was no longer just a glow. It was shedding sparks of pure white electricity. "You aren't strong, Vane," she wheezed, pushing herself up. "You're just the loudest coward in the room."
She didn't shift.
Instead, she concentrated all her energy into her fingertips, forming claws of solid light. She met his next charge head-on. The sound of her light claws clashing against his silver prosthetic was like a hammer on an anvil. They were a dance of shadow and lightning, moving so fast that to the spectators below, they were just two streaks of lethal color. 3 floors below, the air was thick with the smell of scorched ozone and blood. Rohale was a whirlwind of violence. He had discarded his empty handgun and was fighting the 3 remaining sentinels with his bare hands. One sentinel slammed a silver-plated fist into Rohale's side, breaking ribs he had only just healed. Rohale didn't flinch. He grabbed the sentinel's helmet and twisted, the sound of snapping neck servos echoing in the hall. "Marcel, the toxin valves," Rohale shouted, coughing up blood. Marcel was at the end of the corridor, his hands deep in the wiring of the gas release system. "It's encrypted. I need 30 seconds. You have 10, Rohale roared, throwing himself onto the last 2 sentinels, pinning them against the wall as they tried to reach Marcel. Their silver armor burned his skin, but he didn't let go. He was the anchor. He was the wall. "Done," Marcel screamed, ripping the master control wire from the panel. The green light on the toxin tanks turned red. The sector was safe. But as Marcel turned to help Rohale, the floor beneath them buckled. Vane's backup, a second juggernaut, burst through the ceiling, its chemical green eyes fixed on the exhausted Alpha and the human boy. On the roof, the battle had reached its bloody conclusion. Vane had Lucienne pinned against the ledge, his silver claw hovering over her heart. "Say goodbye to your revolution, little wolf." Lucienne looked him dead in the eye. She didn't look afraid. She looked hungry. "I told you, Vane," she whispered. "The silver doesn't die." She grabbed his silver arm with both hands. Usually, the silver would burn her to the bone, but she didn't resist it. She absorbed the heat. She channeled the entire core struggle, the pain of her parents' death, the humiliation of the auction, the love for Rohale, and poured it into Vane's prosthetic. The silver turned white-hot. Vane screamed as the heat traveled up the metal, melting the wires and fusing his nerves. The prosthetic exploded in a shower of sparks. Lucienne didn't let go. She used his momentum and flipped him over her shoulder, sending him tumbling over the edge of the black spire. The High Alpha didn't scream as he fell. He was silenced by the sight of the city he once owned, now glowing with the flickering silver lights of 1,000 rebellious Omegas rising in the streets. Lucienne stood at the edge, watching him vanish into the dark. She was exhausted, her dress in tatters, her skin covered in silver burns. "Lucienne." She turned to see Rohale emerging from the stairwell. He was covered in blood, leaning heavily on Marcel, but he was alive. He looked at her, standing against the moon, and for the first time, he didn't see a prize or a wife. He saw a goddess. "Is it done?" Rohale asked, his voice raw. Lucienne looked out over the city. The black spire was theirs. The broadcast was complete. The High Alpha was gone. "No," Lucienne said, her eyes slowly returning to their hazel hue. "This was just the opening act. Now we have a city to rule." The death of Vane didn't bring peace. It brought a feeding frenzy. Within 48 hours, the city's power grid had become a map of warring territories. The High Alpha's seat was cold, and every mid-level alpha with a thirst for blood was aiming for it. Lucienne stood in the ruins of the Black Spire's penthouse, looking at the city. Smoke rose from the northern districts, where the remaining Loups Noirs were fighting a losing battle against BB's street-bred Omegas. "The Council has called an emergency summit," Rohale said, stepping up behind her. He wore a fresh black suit, but his movements were stiff, his body a map of bandages beneath the silk. "They're meeting at the Marble Hall. It's neutral ground, which means everyone will be carrying concealed silver." "They didn't invite me," Lucienne noted, her voice cold. "They invited me," Rohale corrected, holding up a heavy, gold-pressed card. "As the head of the Al-Hassana syndicate. They think I'm coming to negotiate the return of my assets. They think you're just the trophy I won back from Vane." Lucienne turned, a lethal smile playing on her lips. "Then let's not disappoint them. I'll wear my best trophy face while I decide which of them lives through the night." The Marble Hall was an architectural relic of a time when shifters ruled openly. Massive pillars of white stone supported a domed ceiling painted with the history of the first packs. Now, the air was thick with the scent of perfume, expensive brandy, and the metallic tang of hidden daggers. 10 alphas sat at the circular table. Among them was Julian DeMonte, looking remarkably unbothered by the fact that he had nearly betrayed Rohale days prior. When the heavy oak doors opened, the room went silent. Rohale walked in, his presence demanding air. But it was the woman on his arm who stopped hearts. Lucienne wore a gown of liquid silver that seemed to move like living metal. Her mask was gone, her hazel eagle eyes scanning the room with a predator's precision. "Rohale," Julian drawled, standing up. "We were just discussing the unfortunate demise of our High Alpha, and the question of who inherits his burdens." "The burdens are already settled," Rohale said, pulling out a chair for Lucienne at the head of the table, the seat that had belonged to Vane. "That seat is for an alpha of a great pack," a scarred man named Garrow growled, slamming his fist on the table. "Not for a syndicate boss, and certainly not for his pet." Lucienne didn't wait for Rohale to defend her. She leaned forward, the silver light in her eyes flickering just enough to make the crystal chandeliers hum. "I am the reason that seat is empty, Garrow," she said, her voice a calm, terrifying silk. "And I am the reason your great packs haven't been burned out of the slums yet. I didn't come here to ask for a seat. I came here to tell you the new rules. Rules? Julian laughed, though his eyes remained wary. You have an army of rats and one broken syndicate. You don't dictate to the council. I have the broadcast codes, Lucienne reminded him. I have the evidence of every bribe you've paid and every cub you've had disappeared to keep your bloodlines pure. If I press one button, the humans won't just hunt you. They'll pave over your territories with concrete. The room shifted. Panic, sharp and acrid, filled the air. You wouldn't, Garrow whispered. You'd expose yourself too. I have nothing left to lose, Lucienne said. But you have your yachts, your villas, and your delicate little hierarchies. Here is the mandate. All Omegas are to be granted pack status immediately. The silver bullet trade is abolished. And 20% of all syndicate revenue goes to the reconstruction of the lower sector. And if we refuse? Julian asked. Lucienne looked at Marcel, who was standing by the door. He signaled to the windows. Suddenly, the reds of sniper lasers danced across the Alpha's chests. Not from the Council's guards, but from BB's Omegas, perched on the surrounding rooftops with the very silver-tipped rifles they had stolen from the port. Then the Council ends tonight, Lucienne said. And we start a Republic of Wolves. A tense, suffocating silence followed. Then, Julian de Monte began to clap. Magnificent, he smirked, raising his glass. Vane was a blunt instrument. You, Lucienne, you are a scalpel. I can work with a scalpel. One by one, the Alphas lowered their heads. It wasn't a surrender of love, but of survival. The summit was over, but as Lucienne and Rohale walked toward their car, a cold wind swept through the courtyard. Lucienne stopped, her ears twitching. Someone is watching us, she whispered. My men have the perimeter, Rohale assured her, but he reached for his holster. A figure emerged from behind a marble statue of a weeping wolf. It was an old woman, draped in rags that smelled of ancient earth and wild rosemary. Her eyes were milky white, blind, yet she looked straight at Lucienne. The silver blood has claimed the throne, the hag croaked. But the moon is red tonight, daughter of lightning. Who are you? Lucienne asked, her silver energy prickling. I am the memory of the forest, the woman said. You think you defeated the High Alpha. But Vane was just a puppet. The ones who truly killed your parents, the ones who want the silver for the Great Ascension, they are not of this city. She pointed a withered finger toward the northern mountains. The Elder Pack is waking. And they do not recognize the laws of men or mafias. They are coming for their heart, Lucienne. And they will tear this city apart to find it. The woman vanished into the mist before Marcel could reach her. Lucienne looked at Rohale, the core struggle, shifting from a battle of survival to a battle of destiny. She's lying, Marcel said, though he looked shaken. No, Lucienne said, looking at her hands, which were beginning to glow with a pale, ghostly light. She's not. The silver isn't just a bloodline, Rohale.
It's a key.
And I think I just turned the lock. The sky above the city didn't turn black. It turned a bruised, sickly violet. Lucienne stood on the balcony of the Al Hassana skyscraper, her skin prickling with an electric dread she hadn't felt since the auction. Below, the city was silent, a terrified, held breath. The Elder didn't arrive with an army. He arrived alone. A massive, bone-white wolf, the size of a small vehicle, trotted down the center of the main boulevard. His fur wasn't hair. It looked like spun glass. Every step he took left a frost pattern on the asphalt. Snipers, take the shot. Rohale's voice crackled over the comms. A volley of silver-tipped rounds erupted from the rooftops. Lucienne watched through binoculars. The bullets hit the white wolf's flank and simply shattered. Like glass hitting stone. The wolf didn't even flinch. He stopped in the center of the square, shifted into a tall, gaunt man with hair as white as a blizzard, and looked up at the skyscraper. Lucienne, the man's voice boomed, amplified by an ancient power that vibrated the glass in her hand. The Elder Pack calls for the tithe. Return the heart, or we shall freeze this city into a tomb. He's not a shifter, Marcel whispered, joining them on the balcony. He's something older. He's a prime, Lucienne said, her silver blood singing a dissonant, terrifying song in her veins. And he's right. He doesn't want the throne. He wants me. We can't fight him here, Rohale said, his face grim as he watched the white-haired man freeze a fountain with a single touch. If he releases that much power in a populated sector, the death toll will be in the thousands. We need the archives. We need to go back to the beginning. The beginning was the estate of Valois. Located in a forbidden valley 4 hours north, the ruins of Lucienne's ancestral home were a place of ghosts. They drove in a reinforced SUV, the air growing colder the further they climbed. As they reached the gates, charred iron twisted into the shape of howling wolves, Lucienne felt a physical weight lift off her chest. The core struggle changed. It wasn't a fight to keep the power in, it was the power coming home. Stay back, Lucienne warned Rohale and Marcel. She walked toward the blackened shell of the manor. As her boots touched the threshold, a pulse of silver light rippled out from her, clearing the ash and revealing a hidden mosaic on the floor. It depicted a woman with glowing eyes holding a pulsing, crystalline heart. My mother didn't just have silver blood, Lucienne whispered, kneeling to touch the stone. She was the guardian of the lunar well. The elders didn't kill my parents for politics. They killed them because my father stole the well's key and hid it inside me. Inside you? Marcel asked, his voice trembling. Lucienne, what does that mean? It means the silver isn't just in my blood, she said, looking at her glowing palms. It is me. I am the vessel. Suddenly the ground shook. The white-haired prime, the one they called Kalen, had followed them. He stood at the edge of the ruins, his presence turning the surrounding trees to ice. The girl speaks the truth, Kalen said, walking toward them with terrifying grace. But a vessel must be emptied to be used. I have come to drain the well, Lucienne. Your life is the price for the Elder Pack's immortality. Rohale stepped in front of her, his claws extended, his blue eyes burning with a suicidal protective rage. You'll have to go through me, ghost. Gladly, Kalen sneered. The fight was a slaughter. Rohale and Marcel moved with peak alpha speed, but Kalen moved between seconds. He backhanded Marcel into a stone pillar and caught Rohale's throat, the alpha's skin beginning to frost over instantly. Stop, Lucienne screamed. She didn't lunge at Kalen. She turned her claws on herself. She pressed her glowing talons against her own chest, right over her heart. If you kill them, I'll shatter the vessel. I'll burn the silver into nothing, and your elders will remain mortal until the sun dies. Kalen froze. His grip on Rohale loosened. You would kill yourself for these mongrels? They aren't mongrels, Lucienne hissed, the silver light around her turning into a blinding, jagged halo. They're my pack. And if you want the heart, you're going to have to take it from a queen who has nothing left to fear. Lucienne closed her eyes and did the one thing her mother had always warned her against. She stopped fighting the core struggle. She opened the floodgates. The silver energy didn't just glow, it erupted. A pillar of white light shot from the ruins of Valois into the sky, piercing the violet clouds. The sheer pressure of the power forced Kalen back, his ice skin cracking under the heat of the lunar fire. You cannot contain it, Kalen yelled, shielding his eyes. It will burn your soul to ash. Then let it burn. Lucienne levitated off the ground, her hair streaming like silver silk. She reached out and grabbed the air itself, pulling the moonlight down into a condensed sphere of pure, unadulterated power. She slammed the sphere into the ground. The shockwave didn't destroy the forest, it cleansed it. The frost vanished. Kalen was thrown miles back, his physical form dissolving into mist as the ancient energy rejected his presence. When the light faded, the ruins were silent. Lucienne fell to the ground, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. Rohale crawled to her, his hands still trembling from the frostbite. He gathered her into his arms, his tears hot against her cold neck. Lucienne, stay with me. Please. She opened her eyes. They weren't hazel anymore. They weren't silver. They were a clear, translucent white. The well is open, Rohale, she whispered, her voice sounding like 1,000 echoes. The elders are coming.
And I
am no longer just a girl. The atmosphere in the city had shifted from a civil war to a cosmic siege. High above the Al Hassana skyscraper, a permanent swirling vortex of silver clouds marked the spot where Lucienne had opened the well. She no longer slept. She sat in the center of the penthouse, levitating inches above the floor, her body a conduit for the raw, humming power of the moon. She hasn't eaten in 3 days, Marcel whispered, standing by the reinforced glass. He looked at Rohale, who was obsessively cleaning a rack of specialized weapons. She's fading, Rohale. That thing, that power is erasing her. Rohale didn't look up. His hands were steady, but his eyes were hollow. She isn't fading. She's evolving. If she doesn't master the well before the eclipse, the elders won't even need to fight us. The feedback will level the continent. Lucienne's eyes snapped open. They were voids of starlight. They are at the gate, she said, her voice vibrating the marrow in their bones.
Who?
Marcel asked, reaching for his blade. The first 3, Lucienne replied, her feet touching the ground with a soft thud. The silver glow receded into her skin, leaving her looking dangerously fragile, yet impossibly sharp. Kalen was just the herald. The kings of the Elder Pack have crossed the veil. They aren't coming for the city anymore. They're coming for the sacrifice. The plaza below was swallowed by a thick, unnatural fog. Out of the mist stepped 3 figures, each draped in pelts that shimmered like frozen aurora borealis. They didn't shift into wolves. They didn't need to. Their very presence caused the stone beneath them to liquefy and reform into jagged, obsidian thrones. Aurelius, the king of solitude. Malphas, the king of carrion. And Vesper, the queen of nightmares. Lucienne Valois. Aurelius's voice was a tectonic shift. The lease on your world has expired. Relinquish the heart, and we shall spare the city. Resist, and we will turn this civilization into a feast of bone. Rohale stepped out onto the balcony, firing a flare into the sky. It was the signal. From the shadows of the surrounding buildings, the Omegas emerged, thousands of them, armed with the silver-tipped rifles and experimental sonic disruptors. Bibi stood at the front, her teeth bared. You're in the wrong neighborhood, grandfathers. Bibi roared. The elder queen, Vesper, tilted her head. She raised a hand, and a wave of pure psychic terror swept through the plaza. The Omegas screamed, dropping their weapons as their worst nightmares took physical form in the fog. Strength in numbers is a human delusion, Vesper hissed. Lucienne didn't take the stairs. She stepped off the balcony, a cape of silver light fluttering behind her like wings. She landed in the center of the plaza, the ground shattering upon impact. Your fight is with me, Lucienne shouted, her hands igniting with white-hot lunar fire. The 3 elders laughed. They moved as one, a blur of ancient, terrifying speed. Aurelius struck first, his fists carrying the weight of mountains. Lucienne parried with a shield of solid light, the impact sending a shockwave that blew the windows out of every building for 3 blocks. Rohale and Marcel dove into the fray, taking on Malphas. It was a dance of desperation. Every time Rohale's claws drew blood, the elder's skin healed instantly, the wounds closing with a hiss of steam. You fight for a dying age, Malphas mocked, slamming Marcel into a car. Lucienne saw her brother fall, and her focus broke. That was all Vesper needed. The Queen of Nightmares lunged, her fingers sinking into Lucienne's chest, reaching for the shimmering heart beneath her ribs. The core struggle reached a screaming pitch. The power inside Lucienne wanted to explode, to destroy everything, friend and foe alike, just to stop the pain. Lucienne, look at me. Rohale's voice pierced the chaos. He was pinned to the ground by Aurelius, but his eyes were fixed on her. Control it. You are the vessel, not the victim. The heart isn't your burden. It's your throne. The moon moved into the path of the sun, casting the city into a terrifying, midday twilight. This was the moment of the Great Ascension. Lucienne grabbed Vesper's wrists, her silver eyes burning with a sudden, calm clarity. You want the heart? Lucienne whispered, the silver light turning a deep, royal purple. Then take all of it. She didn't push the elders away.
She pulled them in.
She turned herself into a black hole of lunar energy. The three elders screamed as their immortality was sucked back into the vessel. The frost melted. The nightmares vanished. The ancient kings began to age in seconds, their glass-like fur turning to gray ash.
No.
Aurelius bellowed, reaching for the well's power. It belongs to the first. It belongs to the living. Lucienne countered. She unleashed the final burst. A supernova of silver light engulfed the plaza, a silent explosion that felt like a prayer. When the light faded, the three elders were gone, reduced to three piles of ancient, weathered dust on the obsidian stone. Lucienne stood in the center, her silver gown now glowing with a permanent, soft radiance. The vortex in the sky closed. The sun returned. The city was silent, but it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of awe. Bibi and the Omegas stood up, shaking off the remnants of the nightmares. Marcel climbed out of the wreckage, bruised but alive. And Rohale walked toward Lucienne, his black suit in tatters, his face covered in the blood of kings. He stopped 3 paces away, looking at the woman who had saved the world. He didn't see the girl he bought at an auction. He didn't see the silver blood. "My queen," he whispered, dropping to one knee. Lucienne reached out, her hand warm and human as she touched his cheek. She pulled him up, her hazel eyes returning, though they still held the depth of the stars. "No more kneeling, Rohale," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The auction is over. The council is gone. The elders are dust." She looked at the city, her city. The core struggle was finally at peace. She was no longer a prize to be hunted or a weapon to be feared. She was the bridge between the old world and the new. "We have a lot of work to do," she said, looking at Marcel and Bibi. "The city needs a heart, and I think I know where to start." She turned back to Rohale, a genuine, beautiful smirk playing on her lips, the same smirk she had when she first jumped out of that window to find her freedom. "But first," she whispered, pulling him close, "I think you owe me a dance. A real one.
No masks.
No silver. Just us." Rohale smiled, his blue eyes finally reflecting peace. "Whatever the queen commands,"